Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. For decades, the story seemed simple, didn't it? Western pharma innovates, China manufactures, cheaply. But is that whole picture about to flip? Are we really seeing innovative Chinese biotech ready to challenge, maybe even overtake, giants like Pfizer and Merck? Because historically, China's role in the drug industry was, well, it was the back room. The place making huge volumes of generics, think paracetamol and those basic active ingredients for drugs made elsewhere. Volume, efficiency, that was the game.
That context is absolutely crucial because the change we're seeing now, the speed and the scale of it it's genuinely remarkable.
Quite.
China isn't just copying drugs anymore.
Not just generics.
No, not at all. It's now the world's second largest source of experimental new drug treatments. We're talking about drugs in development.
Wow, second largest globally. In terms of new drugs being developed, that's a massive strategic pivot.
It really is. And this wasn't overnight. It sort of started brewing around, say 2015. And then it got formalized in big government plans like the famous Made in China 2025.
Yeah.
So if you look at the global pipeline today, China's contribution is roughly, well, figures vary, but maybe near 30% of all drugs being investigated worldwide. They've gone from making the parts to designing the whole engine, so to speak.
Okay, let's dig into that. If there was one defining moment, maybe a wake-up call for the rest of the world, it seems to be the success story around a company called Akeso.
Akeso, yes. That really brought things into sharp focus, especially in oncology, which is often where you see the cutting edge.
And what was the specific breakthrough?
It's centered on their drug, ivonescimab. Now, this is quite an advanced type of therapy. It's what they called a PD-1 VEGF bispecific antibody.
Okay, bispecific meaning?
Meaning it targets two different biological pathways at the same time, unlike a standard antibody that usually hits just one. The idea is you get a more powerful effect, maybe better at stopping tumor growth.
And the big news?
The big news came from their phase 3 trial in China, Harmony 2. In that study, ivonescimab went head-to-head against Merck's pembrolizumab.
Pembrolizumab, that's Keytruda, right? For our listeners, that's one of the biggest blockbuster drugs ever, a real standard of care in cancer treatment.
Exactly. Keytruda. So for a drug developed in China to show superiority over a global gold standard like Keytruda in a major late-stage trial, well, even though it was a China-based trial, that sent a very strong message.
A message that the science coming out of China is now seriously competitive on the world stage.
Precisely. World-class innovative science.
But hang on, you mentioned it was a China-run trial. That sounds important. Why can't they just take those results and say, job done, approved everywhere?
That's the critical nuance here. The results in China were very impressive, but getting a drug approved globally, especially by the US FDA or the European EMA, that's a whole different ballgame.
So victory might be a bit premature.
Definitely premature for a global label. And we're already seeing some hints of this. The early data coming out from global studies of ivonescimab run with partners like Summit Therapeutics seems, well, a bit more mixed than the China-only results.
Why the difference? Is it just different doctors, different hospitals?
It's more about the patients and the regulations.
Yeah.
The FDA, for example, insists on what they call multi-regional clinical trial data. Meaning the trial data needs to show the drug works safely and effectively across the kind of diverse patient population you find in the U.S. Caucasians, African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, and so on.
Right, and a trial run only in China is going to have a much more homogeneous group of patients.
Understandably, yes. So that data, while valuable, just isn't sufficient on its own to get that crucial FDA approval for the U.S. market.
So the hurdle isn't just paperwork. It means Chinese companies need to build or partner to access this massive, complex, global clinical trial capability, which is expensive and difficult.
Extremely expensive and organizationally complex. They either need those Western partners with existing global networks, or they have to commit huge resources to running these massive trials themselves across many countries, dealing with multiple regulators. It's a huge step up.
Okay, so this rapid rise didn't just happen by chance. What were the key things that enabled China to go from making ingredients to potentially world-beating drugs in, about a decade?
You could really point to three main pillars, all strongly supported by government policy.
Okay, pillar one.
First, a massive regulatory speed-up. China's drug regulator, the NMPA, went through a huge reform. They had this enormous backlog of drug applications, nearly 20,000, and they cleared it in about 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, quite something. And crucially, they slashed the time it takes to get approval to even start a clinical trial. The latest push is aiming for just 30 business days for innovative drugs.
30 business days. Compared to what it might take elsewhere, that's a huge advantage in development time.
A massive advantage. Time is absolutely critical in this industry. Shaving months off that early phase saves money and gets potential treatments moving faster.
Makes sense. What's pillar number 2?
Talent policy. Specifically, attracting highly skilled people back to China. There was a big focus on recruiting sea turtles, or haigi. These are Chinese scientists who trained or worked at top institutions and companies in the West.
So reversing the brain drain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was more than just stopping people leaving. It was actively recruiting experienced talent back home, often with significant incentives from local governments for labs and facilities.
And is there data showing this worked? It wasn't just a few high-profile cases?
Oh, yes. OECD data confirms that trend. Since the late 2000s. More scientists were returning to China than leaving. And perhaps more importantly, look at the output. By 2022, China had actually surpassed both the US and the EU in the number of high-impact scientific publications.
So the quality is demonstrably there.
Measurably improving, yes.
Yeah.
Driven by this returning talent and significant investment in research infrastructure.
Okay, so you've got fast regulation, top talent. The missing piece is usually money, right? Drug development takes billions in years.
And that's the third pillar, capital availability. This biotech boom needed fuel, and private funding poured in. It went from maybe $1 billion back in 2016 to nearly $13 billion by 2021.
A 13-fold increase in 5 years?
Roughly, yes. That surge provided the patient capital needed. Because you're right, this isn't quick R&D. You need investors willing to wait potentially a decade or more for a return. That capital became available.
So with the state helping speed things up, attracting talent and money flowing in, why are so many Chinese biotech firms still doing these big licensing deals with Western pharma companies? If they have all these advantages, why not go it alone, especially in their huge domestic market?
Oh, that's the paradox, isn't it? The state is brilliant at fostering innovation, but it's also very, very aggressive when it comes to pricing drugs within China.
How so?
Through centralized procurement systems. The big one is the National Reimbursement Drug List, the NRDL. They use something called volume-based procurement, which essentially forces companies to bid against each other, driving prices down dramatically, even for innovative new medicines.
So the margins get squeezed really tight, even for breakthroughs.
Exactly. The Chinese market offers huge patient volume, which is great for clinical trials and initial launch, but it's not where companies can make the kind of substantial profits needed to reinvest billions into the next wave of R&D.
I see. So the really lucrative markets are still the US and the EU.
Undeniably. Despite all their own pressures and complexities, the US and EU markets offer significantly higher pricing potential for innovative drugs. And that financial reality is what's driving this huge wave of China to West out-licensing deals. They need access to those higher margin markets.
And these deals were becoming quite significant, right? You mentioned maybe a third of Big Pharma's deal-making value now involves Chinese biotech assets.
Yes, the numbers are substantial and growing. But it's important to look at what is being licensed. Mostly, it's still assets in the preclinical stage or very early clinical trials like phase 1.
So the Chinese firms are proving the initial concept, de-risking it a bit, and then handing off the really expensive late-stage global development.
That's largely the model right now, yes. They get upfront payments and milestone payments along the way, plus royalties if the drug succeeds. Take that Hengrui deal with GSK you mentioned, potentially worth billions.
But the Chinese company isn't capturing the majority of the ultimate profit if the drug becomes a blockbuster.
Not currently, no. The Western partner is shouldering the enormous cost and risk of those global phase 2 and 3 trials, navigating the FDEMA approvals, and building the global sales infrastructure. So, quite logically, they capture the lion's share of the eventual revenue. The Chinese firm gets vital cash flow and validation, but the big prize often goes west.
And all this is happening just as Western pharma faces its own headwinds, this looming patent cliff, potentially losing $100 billion or more in sales from expiring patents. The timing seems challenging for incumbents.
The timing is certainly remarkable. You have this pressure on Western pharma's existing portfolio, and simultaneously this rising tide of innovation from China. Add in the layer of geopolitical uncertainty.
Like the situation in the U.S., talk of tariffs, pricing pressures like most favored nation, scrutinizing visas for scientists.
Exactly. All those things create uncertainty in the West, which probably acts as another push factor for some of that scientific talent, deciding whether to stay abroad or return to a perhaps more predictable, state-supported environment in China.
And are we seeing defensive moves from Western companies already? Like Merck, the maker of Keytruda, are they rethinking where they even make their drugs?
We are hearing that talk, yes. Geopolitical risk is now a major factor in supply chain decisions. Merck has publicly discussed bringing some key manufacturing for the U.S. market back to the U.S., moving away from traditional hubs like Ireland, partly as a hedge against potential disruptions or political tensions.
So geopolitics is directly impacting manufacturer strategy now.
Absolutely. And it reinforces the investment perspective, too. Investors looking at Chinese biotechs are increasingly asking, does this company have a clear path to generate revenue outside China in international markets? Because the domestic market, while huge, might be more of an incubator than the ultimate profit engine.
Which brings us back to the big question we started with. Based on everything we've discussed, the science, the speed, the deals, the politics, is a Chinese takeover of the global pharma landscape truly imminent?
Imminent takeover, I think that's probably too strong still. The progress is undeniable. The pipeline, the talent, the ambition are all real. But the final crucial test is still ahead.
Which is?
Successfully navigating those large, complex, multi-regional pivotal trials and securing those FDA and EMA approvals. That's the validation that truly unlocks the major global markets. That hurdle hasn't been consistently cleared yet on a large scale.
So if listeners want to track this, what are the key signals to watch over, say, the next year or two?
I'd point to two main things. First, obviously, watch the results of those global pivotal trials and the subsequent FDA filings for flagship Chinese drugs like ivonescimab. Do they replicate the success seen in China? Do they get approved? That tells you about the scientific translation.
Okay, global trial results and FDA decisions. What's the second signal?
Second, look at the nature of the out-licensing deals. Are they still mostly very early stage phase 1 assets? Or do we start seeing more deals for later stage assets, maybe phase 2 or phase 3? If Chinese firms start holding on to drugs longer, funding more of the development themselves before partnering, that would signal growing confidence, stronger balance sheets, and a real maturing of their ability to manage later stage risk.
A shift from early bets to more developed products.
Exactly. That would indicate a deeper shift in the balance of power. And maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Politics and trade friction will definitely shape how these East-West partnerships work. They might get more complicated, more scrutinized. But stepping back, the emergence of a whole new engine for drug discovery, creating potentially innovative and maybe even cheaper medicines. That fundamentally sounds like a good thing for global health, doesn't it? The big worry is whether geopolitics might end up getting in the way, blocking potential cures from reaching patients worldwide.
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.